Hi all, welcome to Crafting with Joel, and I thought we would spend a few minutes discussing yarns and what you do not want to do with your projects once you have finished them, if you're giving them for gifts, what yarns cannot go in the washing machine and the dryer, how you want to properly take care of your beautiful handmade things. As you can see, I'm still knitting this sweater. Um, but before we get into that, let's talk gauge and why it's very important to do a swatch gauge when you're knitting something and when you should do a gauge for projects. Now, gauge swatches are very important if you're going to be doing hats, mittens, socks, sweaters, anything that is to be worn. You want to do a gauge. Now, do you need to do a gauge for scarves, for shawls? Not necessarily, unless you want the item to be done for a person or a specific pattern. You want it to be on gauge. Now, you might be saying, well, Joel, this is all good, and you're saying all this information. What the hell does it mean by doing a gauge? And unfortunately, I don't have my little gauge swatch. But before I knitted this sweater, I did a gauge swatch based on the pattern's recommendation. And a gauge swatch basically means you're going to do an X amount of stitches for an X amount of rows to get gauge. Now, this particular pattern calls for 18 stitches in 24 rows will equal 4 inches. And that was done using the needles that I'm currently working with, which is why this particular yarn calls for a much smaller needle. I am not doing that. I'm using a bigger needle because if I use the small needle, or what the yarn recommends needle-wise, I wouldn't have had the gauge that I needed to do this sweater. And it's very important, especially if you're going to be making items to be worn and to be given away or gifted for family members or close friends. And we'll get into who you want to knit for and who you don't want to knit for later on. I'm not going to necessarily do that in the video, but there are people that are knit-worthy, and then there are people that are not knit-worthy. And we'll go by that later in the video. But it's very important, if you're going to do any items of clothing, do a swatch gauge. You'll thank me later. So let's get into how to care for your items when you have finished them, and what is used in the project is very important on how you're going to care for them. Now, if you're a knitter or a crocheter like me and you use nothing but fine wool or wool blends, this, for example, in a past video I said this is a blend of extra fine merino wool. It's got 75% merino wool and 25% of mulberry silk. This cannot go in the washing machine, nor can this go in the dryer. So you might be wondering, well then how the hell do you take care of this? Well, you hand wash this very gently in cold water with a specific soap designed for this material. And it's very important, and I, again, don't have my sweater with me. It's kind of buried right now. But most people are used to, when they wash them and they're fully wet, they'll grab them by the top of the sweater. And this, you can tell, is the top of the sweater. Unfortunately, I'm still working on it, so it hasn't had the base. Never, ever, when you're using really fine wool and you're doing a hand wash, pick it up by the shoulders. The proper technique of how to pick up a wet sweater or wet item is to grab the whole thing in one fell swoop, lie it flat on towels. You can roll them up a little bit to drain any excess water, and then allow them to dry flat. You never ever want to hang something like this up on a hanger, because what will happen is you will actually stretch out the fibers in the yarn. So that being said, what types of, and I'm sorry that the computer is moving, I have a dog that's trying to go under the covers. So what types of yarn are there that can be possibly machine used, and what would you want to use them for? Well, in the wool family, there are wools that cannot be washed. They have to be hand treated, lie flat to dry. There are wools that are called superwash. And what is the superwash? Well, superwash yarns are yarns that you can actually put on a gentle cycle, cold water, or very lukewarm water, never hot. This is a big thing when you're doing a hand project. Never ever put a handmade project that you have knitted and or crocheted into a hot washing machine or a hot dryer. What will happen if you do that is you will either shrink it or you'll destroy it. And all of that hard work that you've done for something so beautiful will have been wasted. So always look at the labels, and I'm going to grab my label over here. And each label on your yarn will actually tell you how to care for it. This one, let's see. This one, let's see. Oh, it's on the inside. Of course it is. Says hand wash gentle in lukewarm water using wool detergent. Rinse thoroughly in lukewarm water, then again in cold water. Gently squeeze water from garment. To remove excess water after washing, roll garment inside a towel and squeeze gently to dry. Lay flat on a dry towel in the shade, coaxing back into shape while damp. So each type of yarn that you buy will tell you how to properly take care of it. Now, the superwash wools will usually have a little bit of acrylic in it. They will not be 100% wool. They'll have some sort of mixture in it that will make them a superwash. Those are the ones that you can gently put in your washing machine. They usually do not or cannot be put in the dryer. Usually they have to be dried flat. Most sweaters that are hand knitted are always going to be lay flat to dry. And this comes up to another item, is how often do you need to wash your handmade sweaters? Well, actually, you don't need to wash them as often as you think you need to do. Nowadays, most people wear deodorant, and usually under sweaters like this, most people will wear an undershirt. And case in point, you can see in this hoodie, and I'll kind of lean back, you can see the blue undershirt, or as it's commonly referred to, a t-shirt. Most people will throw a t-shirt underneath their sweater. So their sweaters don't necessarily need to be washed every time unless you make a little spill. Now, sometimes if you have spilt on your handmade sweater, a damp cloth, gently to rub, a little bit of soap will take care of any stains, and you don't need to wash the entire sweater. If you use heavy perfumes, I happen to wear a lot of colognes, then you might want to wash it every so often. But usually just allowing it to air dry flat for a day or two will take that out of the sweater, and you don't need to worry about hand washing it and laying it flat to dry. So, the ones that usually can be washed are the acrylics. Can definitely go through the washing machine. However, certain brands of yarn, and I'm not going to name them, but the cheaper end yarns that have a lot of acrylic, usually they're going to be 85 or 80 to 95% acrylic. Those will pill really bad. And what I mean by pill is, and I don't know if you can, yeah, you can see this. See at the top how this has a little fuzz ball on it? That's just the fiber that's shedding of the wool. Well, acrylics will do this, but it will do it 10 times worse. And those things, if you've ever, when you've washed things that you have bought at a normal store, such as Target, Walmart, any fabric or clothing stores, I should say, not fabric stores, but clothing stores, and you put them in the dryer, you've cared for them like the label says in your garment, you'll notice that there is a lot of lint on your dryer, hence why you're always taking lint out of your drying filter that's in your dryer. Well, that's what sweaters will do. So you want to be extra careful when you're caring for your hand knitted items, and go by their label recommendations. Now, in some cases, let's say you've made a beautiful project and you made it too big and you don't know what to do. Some things can be shrunk. And usually the items that can be shrunk are the wools. Now, what that means is you're going to add a little bit of heat to shrink an item. This is where you need to be careful for, and you need to always monitor whatever you're putting through the washing machine, or if you're putting it through the dryer, that you're not walking away from the project, because very quickly things can shrink much faster than you want them to, and they can shrink to the point where you cannot save them. Case in point, a long time ago, my wonderful husband, I had bought a brand new cashmere sweater, and it was a cashmere wool blend sweater. It was a beautiful red sweater. I loved it. It was quite expensive. It, foolishly, with me, I put them all together with my other sweaters, went down to do laundry. Husband was already doing laundry, said leave them there, I'll do them. Next thing I know, he brings up this little tiny little sweater and said, was this in your thing? And I said, that was my brand new cashmere sweater. Unfortunately, he ran it through both the washer and the dryer at a high heat, and it shrank to the point where it wasn't wearable anymore. So you always want to be very careful when you're washing and taking care of your hand knitted items, and always follow the recommendation on how to properly care for them. Hope this guy helped you guys. Now, I'm going to go into another part in a second here. I'm going to take 2 seconds to say thank you so much for watching. There will be a part 2 to this in a few minutes. Stay tuned for that. I will see you on that video.